Good evening and welcome back to Cecilia. Actually, I'm just going to start reading. Chapter 10. A Retreat. The next morning Cecilia arose late, not only to avoid the raillery of Lady Honoria, but to escape seeing the departure of Delvile. She knew that the spirit with which she had left him made him at present think her wholly insensible, and she was at least happy to be spared the mortification of a discovery, since she found him thus content, without even solicitation, to resign her. Before she was dressed, Lady Honoria ran into her room. "A new scheme of politics!" she cried. "Our great statesman intends to leave us. He can't trust his baby out of his sight, so he is going to nurse him while upon the road himself. Poor, pretty, dear Mortimer! What a puppet do they make of him! I have a vast inclination to get a pap boat myself, and make him a present of it." Cecilia then inquired further particulars, and heard that Mr Delvile proposed accompanying his son to Bristol, whose journey therefore was postponed for a few hours to give time for new preparations. Mr Delvile, who upon this occasion thought himself overwhelmed with business, because before his departure he had some directions to give to his domestics, chose to breakfast in his own apartment. Mrs Delvile also, wishing for some private conversation with her son, invited him to partake of hers in her dressing room, sending an apology to her guests, and begging they would order their breakfast when they pleased. Mr Delvile, scrupulous in ceremony, had made sundry apologies to Lord Ernolf for leaving him, but his real anxiety for his son overpowering his artificial character, the excuses he gave to that nobleman were such as could not possibly offend, and the views of his lordship himself in his visit being nothing interrupted so long as Cecilia continued at the castle, he readily engaged, as a proof that he was not affronted, to remain with Mrs Delvile till his return. Cecilia therefore had her breakfast with the two lords and Lady Honoria, and when it was over, Lord Ernolf proposed to his son riding the first stage with the two Mr Delviles on horseback. This was agreed upon, and they left the room, and then Lady Honoria, full of frolic and gaiety, seized one of the napkins, and protested she would send it to Mortimer for a slabbering bib. She therefore made it up in a parcel, and wrote upon the inside of the paper with which she enveloped it, "A pinafore for Master Mortimer Delvile, lest he should daub his pappy when he is feeding him." Eager to have this properly conveyed, she then ran out to give it in charge to her own man, who was to present him with it as he got into the chaise. She had but just quitted the room when the door of it was again opened, and by Mortimer himself, booted and equipped for his journey. "Miss Beverley, here, and alone," cried he, with a look and in a voice which showed that all the pride of the preceding evening was sunk into the deepest dejection. "And does she not fly me as I approach her? Can she patiently bear in her sight one so strange, so fiery, so inconsistent? But she is too wise to resent the ravings of a madman, and who, under the influence of a passion at once hopeless and violent, could boast but at intervals full possession of his reason?" Cecilia, utterly astonished by a gentleness so humble, looked at him in silent surprise. He advanced to her mournfully, and added, "I am ashamed indeed of the bitterness of spirit with which I last night provoked your displeasure, when I should have supplicated your lenity. But though I was prepared for your coldness, I could not endure it, and though your indifference was almost friendly, it made me little less than frantic, so strangely may justice be blinded by passion, and every faculty of reason be warped by selfishness." "You have no apology to make, sir," cried Cecilia, "since, believe me, I require none." "You may well," returned he, half smiling, "dispense with my apologies, since under the sanction of that word I obtained your hearing yesterday. But believe me, you will now find me far more reasonable. A whole night's reflections which no repose interrupted, have brought me to my senses. Even lunatics, you know, have lucid moments." "Do you intend, sir, to set off soon?" "I believe so. I wait only for my father. But why is Miss Beverley so impatient? I shall not soon return, that at least is certain, and for a few instants' delay may surely offer some palliation. See, if I am not ready to again accuse you of severity. I must run, I find, or all my boasted reformation will end but in fresh offence, fresh disgrace, and fresh contrition. Adieu, madam. and may all prosperity attend you. That will be for ever my darling wish, however long my absence, however distant the climates which may part us." He was then hurrying away, but Cecilia, from an impulse of surprise too sudden to be restrained, exclaimed, "The climates? Do you then mean to leave England?" "Yes," cried he with quickness, "for why should I remain in it? A few weeks only could I fill up in any tour so near home, and hither in a few weeks to return would be folly and madness. In an absence so brief, what thought but that of the approaching meeting would occupy me? And what, at that meeting, should I feel but joy the most dangerous, and delight which I dare not think of? Every conflict renewed, every struggle refelt, again all this scene would require to be acted. Again I must tear myself away, and every tumultuous passion now beating in my heart would be revived, and if possible be revived with added misery. No, neither my temper nor my constitution will endure such another shock. One parting shall suffice, and the fortitude with which I will lengthen my self-exile shall atone to myself for the weakness which makes it requisite." And then, with a vehemence that seemed fearful of the smallest delay, he was again and yet more hastily going, when Cecilia, with much emotion, called out, "2 moments, sir." 2,000, 2,000,000, cried he impetuously, and returning with a look of the most earnest surprise, he added, "What is it Miss Beverley will condescend to command?" "Nothing," cried she, recovering her presence of mind, "but to beg you will by no means upon my account quit the country and your friends, since another asylum can be found for myself, and since I would much sooner part from Mrs Delvile, greatly and sincerely as I reverence her, than be instrumental to robbing her even for a month of her son." "Generous and humane is the consideration," cried he, "but who's half so generous, so humane as Miss Beverley? So soft to all others, so noble in herself? Can my mother have a wish when I leave her to you? No. She is sensible of your worth, she adores you, almost as I adore you myself. You are now under her protection. You seem indeed born for each other. Let me not then deprive her of so honourable a charge. Oh, why must he, who sees in such colours the excellencies of both, who admires with such fervour the perfections you unite, be torn with this violence from the objects he reveres, even though half his life he would sacrifice to spend in their society what remained?" "Well, sir," said Cecilia, who now felt her courage decline, and the softness of sorrow steal fast upon her spirits, "if you will not give up your scheme, let me no longer detain you." "Will you not wish me a good journey?" "Yes, very sincerely." "And will you pardon the unguarded errors which have offended you?" "I will think of them, sir, no more." "Farewell, then, most amiable of women, and may every blessing you deserve light on your head." I leave you to my mother, certain of your sympathetic affection for a character so resembling your own. When you, madam, leave her, may the happy successor in your favour—" He paused, his voice faltered. Cecilia, too, turned away from him, and uttering a deep sigh, he caught her hand, and pressing it to his lips, exclaimed, "Oh, great be your felicity, in whatever way you receive it! Pure as your virtues, and warm as your benevolence! Oh, too lovely Miss Beverley, why must I quit you?" Cecilia, though she trusted not her voice to reprove him, forced away her hand, and then in the utmost perturbation he rushed out of the room. This scene for Cecilia was the most unfortunate that could have happened. The gentleness of Delvile was alone sufficient to melt her, since her pride had no subsistence when not fed by his own, and while his mildness had blunted her displeasure, his anguish had penetrated her heart. Lost in thought and in sadness, she continued fixed to her seat, and looking at the door through which he had passed, as if with himself he had shut out all for which he existed. This pensive dejection was not long uninterrupted. Lady Honoria came running back with intelligence in what manner she had disposed of her napkin, and Cecilia, in listening, endeavoured to find some diversion, but her ladyship, though volatile, not undiscerning, soon perceived that her attention was constrained, and looking at her with much archness, said, "I believe, my dear, I must find another napkin for you. Not, however, for your mouth, but for your eyes. Has Mortimer been in to take leave of you?" "Take leave of me? No. Is he gone?" "Oh, no. Pappy has a world of business to settle first. He won't be ready these 2 hours. But don't look so sorrowful, for I'll run and bring Mortimer to console you." Away she flew, and Cecilia, who had no power to prevent her, finding her spirits unequal either to another parting or to the raillery of Lady Honoria, should Mortimer for his own sake avoid it, took refuge in flight, and seizing an umbrella, escaped into the park, where, to perplex any pursuers, instead of choosing her usual walk, she directed her steps to a thick and unfrequented wood, and never rested till she was more than 2 miles from the house. Fidèle, however, who now always accompanied her, ran by her side, and when she thought herself sufficiently distant and private to be safe, she sat down under a tree, and caressing her faithful favourite, soothed her own tenderness by lamenting that he had lost his master, and having now no part to act and no dignity to support, no observation to fear and no interference to guard against, she gave vent to her long smothered emotion by weeping without caution or restraint. She had met with an object whose character answered all her wishes for him, with whom she should entrust her fortune, and whose turn of mind, so similar to her own, promised her the highest domestic felicity. To this object her affections had involuntarily bent. They were seconded by her esteem, and unchecked by any suspicion of impropriety in her choice. She had found, too, in return, that his heart was all her own. Her birth indeed was inferior, but it was not disgraceful. Her disposition, education, and temper seemed equal to his fondest wishes. Yet at the very time when their union appeared most likely, when they mixed with the same society and dwelt under the same roof, when the father to one was the guardian to the other, and interest seemed to invite their reliance even more than affection, the young man himself, without counsel or command, could tear himself from her present by an effort all his own, forbear to seek her heart, and almost charge her not to grant it, and determining upon voluntary exile, quit his country and his connections with no view and for no reason, but merely that he might avoid the sight of her he loved. Though the motive for this conduct was now no longer unknown to her, she neither thought it satisfactory nor necessary. Yet while she censured his flight, she bewailed his loss, and though his inducement was repugnant to her opinion, his command over his passions she admired and applauded. Men are idiotic sometimes, but oh, I sort of like Delval more for being such an idiotic example of a human being. He's very human. Like, I mean, what an idiot. He's an idiot, but it's the sort of thing that people do, isn't it? Make up stupid reasons why they can't be together, and then fail to act in a way that will promote their happiness. And I get Cecilia too, that she thinks this is the stupidest behaviour imaginable. She's like, what is he doing? Why is he like this? How can he do this? And yet she still admires him. I don't know. And yet she's so frustrated because she thinks we could be happy. Everything is in our favour. There is no reason why we can't just get together. And yet they can't because he won't let them. And I don't know. I get it. I think it's more true, even if it's less heroic and less satisfactory. It's much more true than the fairy tale style of Evelina. And I can't really censure Delval for being a real human being, even though I really want to shake him and just be like, oh my god, is your name that important? Really? And as you can see, there are about 500 pages left in which we will continue to ask the question, is his name really that important? Anyway, quite a shortish chapter, I think. Chapter 11. A Worry. Cecilia continued in this private spot, happy at least to be alone, till she was summoned by the dinner bell to return home. As soon as she entered the parlour, where everybody was assembled before her, she observed by the countenance of Mrs. Delvile that she had passed that she had passed the morning as sadly as herself. "Miss Beverley," cried Lady Honoria, before she was seated, "I insist upon your taking my place to-day." "Why so, madam?" "Because I cannot suffer you to sit by a window with such a terrible cold." "Your ladyship is very good, but indeed I have not any cold at all." "Oh, my dear, I must beg your pardon there. Your eyes are quite bloodshot. Mrs. Delvile, Lord Ernolf, are not her eyes quite red? Lord, and so I protest are her cheeks. Now do pray look in the glass. I assure you will hardly know yourself." Mrs. Delvile, who regarded her with the utmost kindness, affected to understand Lady Honoria's speech literally, both to lessen her apparent confusion and the suspicious surmises of Lord Ernolf. She therefore said, "You have indeed a bad cold, my love, but shade your eyes with your hat, and after dinner you shall bathe them in rose water, which will soon take off the inflammation." Cecilia, perceiving her intention, for which she felt the utmost gratitude, no longer denied her cold, nor refused the offer of Lady Honoria, who, delighting in mischief, whencesoever it proceeded, presently added, "This cold is a judgment upon you for leaving me alone all this morning, but I suppose you chose a tête-à-tête with your favourite without the intrusion of any third person." Here everybody stared, and Cecilia very seriously declared she had been quite alone. "Is it possible you can so forget yourself?" cried Lady Honoria. "Had you not your dearly beloved with you?" Cecilia, who now comprehended that she meant Fidèle, coloured more deeply than ever, but attempted to laugh, and began eating her dinner. "Here is some matter of much intricacy," cried Lord Ernolf, "but to me wholly unintelligible." "And to me also," cried Mrs. Delvile, "but I am content to let it remain so, for the mysteries of Lady Honoria are so frequent that they deaden curiosity." "Dear madam, that is very unnatural," cried Lady Honoria, "for I am sure you must long to know who I mean." "I do at least," said Lord Ernolf. "Why then, my lord, you must know Miss Beverley has two companions, and I am one, and Fidèle is the other, but Fidèle was with her all this morning, and she would not admit me to the conference. I suppose she had something private to say to him of his master's journey." "What rattle is this?" cried Mrs. Delvile. "Fidèle is gone with my son, is he not?" turning to the servants. "No, madam, Mr. Mortimer did not inquire for him." "That's very strange," said she. "I never knew him quit home without him before." "Dear madam, if he had taken him," cried Lady Honoria, "what could poor Miss Beverley have done? For she has no friend here but him and me, and really he is so much the greater favourite, that it is well if I do not poison him some day for very spite." Cecilia had no resource but in forcing a laugh, and Mrs. Delvile, who evidently felt for her, contrived soon to change the subject, yet not before Lord Ernolf, with infinite chagrin, was certain by all that passed of the hopeless state of affairs for his son. The rest of the day, and every hour of the 2 days following, Cecilia passed in the most comfortless constraint, fearful of being a moment alone, lest the heaviness of her heart should seek relief in tears, which consolation, melancholy as it was, she found too dangerous for indulgence. Yet the gaiety of Lady Honoria lost all power of entertainment, and even the kindness of Mrs. Delvile, now she imputed it to compassion, gave her more mortification than pleasure. On the 3rd day letters arrived from Bristol, but they brought with them nothing of comfort, for though Mortimer wrote gaily, his father sent word that his fever seemed threatening to return. Mrs. Delvile was now in the extremest anxiety, and the task of Cecilia in appearing cheerful and unconcerned became more and more difficult to perform. Lord Ernolf's efforts to oblige her grew as hopeless to himself as they were irksome to her, and Lady Honoria alone of the whole house could either find or make the smallest diversion. But while Lord Derford remained, she had still an object for ridicule, and while Cecilia could colour and be confused, she had still a subject for mischief. Thus passed a week, during which, the news from Bristol being every day less and less pleasant, Mrs. Delvile showed an earnest desire to make a journey thither herself, and proposed, half laughing and half seriously, that the whole party should accompany her. Lady Honoria's time, however, was already expired, and her father intended to send for her in a few days. Mrs Delvile, who knew that such a charge would occupy all her time, willingly deferred setting out till her ladyship should be gone, but wrote word to Bristol that she should shortly be there, attended by the 2 lords who insisted upon escorting her. Cecilia now was in a state of the utmost distress. Her stay at the castle she knew kept Delvile at a distance. To accompany his mother to Bristol was forcing herself into his sight, which equally from prudence and pride she wished to avoid, and even Mrs Delvile evidently desired her absence, since whenever the journey was talked of, she preferably addressed herself to any one else who was present. All she could devise to relieve herself from a situation so painful was begging permission to make a visit without delay to her old friend Mrs Charlton in Suffolk. This resolution taken, she put it into immediate execution, and seeking Mrs Delvile, inquired if she might venture to make a petition to her. "Undoubtedly," answered she, "but let it not be very disagreeable, since I feel already that I can refuse you nothing." "I have an old friend, ma'am," she then cried, speaking fast and in much haste to have done, "who I have not for many months seen, and as my health does not require a Bristol journey, if you would honour me with mentioning my request to Mr Delvile, I think I might take the present opportunity of making Mrs Charlton a visit." Mrs Delvile looked at her some time without speaking, and then fervently embracing her, "Sweet Cecilia," she cried, "yes, you are all that I thought you. Good, wise, discreet, tender, and noble at once. How to part with you, indeed, I know not, but you shall do as you please, for that I am sure will be right, and therefore I will make no opposition." Cecilia blushed and thanked her, yet saw but too plainly that all the motives of her scheme were clearly comprehended. She hastened therefore to write to Mrs Charlton, and prepare for her reception. Mr Delvile, though with his usual formality, sent his permission, and Mortimer at the same time begged his mother would bring with her Fidel, whom he had unluckily forgotten. Lady Honoria, who was present when Mrs Delvile mentioned this commission, said in a whisper to Cecilia, "Miss Beverley, don't let him go." "Why not?" "Oh, you had a great deal better take him slyly into Suffolk." "I would as soon," answered Cecilia, "take with me the sideboard of plate, for I should scarcely think it more a robbery." "Oh, I beg your pardon. I am sure they might all take such a theft for an honour, and if I was going to Bristol, I would bid Mortimer send him to you immediately. However, if you wish it, I will write to him. He's my cousin, you know, so there will be no great impropriety in it." Cecilia thanked her for so courteous an offer, but entreated that she might by no means draw her into such a condescension. She then made immediate preparations for her journey into Suffolk, which she saw gave equal surprise and chagrin to Lord Ernolf, upon whose affairs Mrs Delvile herself now desired to speak with her. "Tell me, Miss Beverley," she cried, "briefly and positively your opinion of Lord Derford." "I cannot think of him so little, madam," she answered, "that I cannot say of him much. He appears, however, to be inoffensive, but indeed were I never to see him again, he is one of those I should forget I had ever seen at all." "That is exactly the case with myself also," cried Mrs Delvile. "That to plead for him I find utterly impossible, though my Lord Ernolf has strongly requested me. But to press such an alliance I should think an indignity to your understanding." Cecilia was much gratified by this speech, but she soon after added, "There is one reason, indeed, which would render such a connection desirable, though that is only one." "What is it, madam?" "His title." "And why so? I am sure I have no ambition of that sort." "No, my love," said Mrs Delvile, smiling, "I mean not by way of gratification to your pride, but to his, since a title by taking place of a family name would obviate the only objection that any man could form to an alliance with Miss Beverley." Cecilia, who too well understood her, suppressed a sigh and changed the subject of conversation. One day was sufficient for all the preparations she required, and as she meant to set out very early the next morning, she took leave of Lady Honoria and the Lords Ernolf and Derford when they separated for the night, but Mrs Delvile followed her to her room. She expressed her concern at losing her in the warmest and most flattering terms, yet said nothing of her coming back, nor of the length of her stay. She desired, however, to hear from her frequently, and assured her that out of her own immediate family there was nobody in the world she so tenderly valued. She continued with her till it grew so late that they were almost necessarily parted, and then rising to be gone, "See," she cried, "with what reluctance I quit you! No interest but so dear a one as that which calls me away should induce me, with my own consent, to bear your absence scarcely an hour. But the world is full of mortifications, and to endure or to sink under them makes all the distinction between the noble or the weak-minded. To you this may be said with safety. To most young women it would pass for a reflection." "You are very good," said Cecilia, smothering the emotions to which this speech gave rise. "And if indeed you honour me with an opinion so flattering, I will endeavour, if it is possibly in my power, not to forfeit it." "Ah, my love," cried Mrs Delvile warmly, "if upon my opinion of you alone depended our residence with each other, when should we ever part, and how live a moment asunder? But what title have I to monopolize two such blessings? The mother of Mortimer Delvile should at nothing repine. The mother of Cecilia Beverley had alone equal reason to be proud." "You are determined, madam," said Cecilia, forcing a smile, "that I shall be worthy, by giving me the sweetest of motives, that of deserving such praise." And then in a faint voice she desired her respects to Mr Delvile, and added, "You will find, I hope, everybody at Bristol better than you expect." "I hope so," returned she, "and that you too will find your Mrs Charlton well, happy, and good as you left her. But suffer her not to drive me from your remembrance, and never fancy that because she has known you longer, she loves you more. My acquaintance with you, though short, has been critical, and she must hear from you a world of anecdotes before she can have reason to love you as much." "Ah, madam," cried Cecilia, tears starting into her eyes, "let us part now. Where will be that strength of mind you expect from me if I listen to you any longer?" "You are right, my love," answered Mrs Delvile, "since all tenderness enfeebles fortitude." Then affectionately embracing her, "Adieu," she cried, "sweet Cecilia, amiable and most excellent creature, adieu! You carry with you my highest approbation, my love, my esteem, my fondest wishes, and shall I? Yes, generous girl, I will add, my warmest gratitude." This last word she spoke almost in a whisper, again kissed her, and hastened out of the room. Cecilia, surprised and affected, gratified and depressed, remained almost motionless, and could not for a great length of time either ring for her maid or persuade herself to go to rest. She saw throughout the whole behaviour of Mrs Delvile a warmth of regard which, though strongly opposed by family pride, made her almost miserable to promote the very union she thought necessary to discountenance. She saw too that it was with the utmost difficulty she preserved the steadiness of her opposition, and that she had a conflict perpetual with herself, to forbear openly acknowledging the contrariety of her wishes, and the perplexity of her distress. But chiefly she was struck with her expressive use of the word gratitude. Wherefore should she be grateful, thought Cecilia? What have I done, or have power to do? Infinitely indeed is she deceived if she supposes that her son has acted by my directions. My influence with him is nothing, and he could not be more his own master were he utterly indifferent to me. To conceal my own disappointment has been all I have attempted, and perhaps she may think of me thus highly, from supposing that the firmness of her son is owing to my caution and reserve. She knows him not. Were my heart at this moment laid open to him, were all its weakness, its partiality, its ill-fated admiration displayed, he would but double his vigilance to avoid and to forget me, and find the task all the easier by his abatement of esteem. O strange infatuation of unconquerable prejudice! His very life will he sacrifice in preference to his name, and while the conflict of his mind threatens to level him with the dust, he disdains to unite himself where one wish is unsatisfied. These reflections, and the uncertainty if she should ever in Delvile Castle sleep again, disturbed her the whole night, and made all calling in the morning unnecessary. She arose at 5 o'clock, dressed herself with the utmost heaviness of heart, and in going through a long gallery which led to the staircase, as she passed the door of Mortimer's chamber, the thought of his ill health, his intended long journey, and the probability that she might never see him more, so deeply impressed and saddened her, that scarcely could she force herself to proceed, without stopping to weep and to pray for him. She was surrounded, however, by servants, and compelled therefore to hasten to the chaise. She flung herself in, and leaning back, drew her hat over her eyes, and thought as the carriage drove off, her last hope of earthly happiness extinguished. End of the 3rd volume. And there's my companion for the evening's reading. Hello. Hello, Dido. It's very sad, wasn't it? Poor Cecilia. You understand, tragic partings between lovers, don't you, Dido? Well, we're going to make sure that you don't. No Trojan princes for you. Not a single one. Anyway. Good night.